Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Governor, welcome back.
Good morning.
It's great to talk to you. I've got so much to go over because of the Red State 100 Days, which you just finished, but I want to clear up one detail from the Courage to Be Free. I've talked to you on the radio a lot of times, talked to you in person. I never knew your mother was from Poland, Ohio, which was down the road from Warren JFK, and we played the Bulldogs. And your father is a Yinzer who went to Youngstown State. I didn't know that till I read this. Now, that is a mixed marriage, a Northeastern Ohioer and a Yinzer. And I think they turned you into a football fan. But tell me, please, you're a Cleveland Browns fan, because sometimes it goes the other way.
Well, Hugh, there are baby pictures of me, unfortunately for you, because I know your allegiance, in Pittsburgh Steeler regalia. You remember, I was born in 78. That was the heyday of the 1970s Steelers dynasty. So that was kind of what my father set me up as. Now, truth be told, I grew up in the Tampa Bay area, and I became a long-suffering Bucs fan at a very young age when they were in the orange uniforms, and they would lose pretty much every year with losing seasons. And we were able to follow them through winning a Super Bowl 20 years ago, and then, of course, with Tom Brady coming. So I'm a Bucs fan. That's just what ended up happening.
Well, now you get Baker, so that almost makes you a Browns fan. But I saw the bit about the photographs. I thought maybe Mom from Poland, Ohio, the Bulldog, would have pulled you over to the light, but I guess not.
There is, in that area in Youngstown, there are a lot. It is split. There are Steeler fans as well, and so the allegiances are interesting there. But I would tell you, though, there are a lot of similarities between Aliquippa and Youngstown. They're both steel towns, and that was just kind of the salt of the earth upbringing that they had, and really reflected in my upbringing.
Yeah, I'll bet you your mom went to Holy Name Parish, but let's not get in it. I want to go to the Red State 100 Days. Now, that takes the December special session and adds in the session that is ending today, and it is a Red State 100 Days like FDR. And so if I can start small and go big, the small one, which I love, is that you signed into law a discount on the toll road. Now, I grew up on the Ohio Turnpike. The price has never gone down. It has never gone away. We paid for that road like 30 times. What did you do for commuters on toll roads in Florida in December?
We slashed the tolls starting January 1st by 50% for all our commuters because, Hugh, they have these passes. So in Florida, we have a Sun Pass. So as you go, look, if you're a visitor, you're paying the toll full boat. But if you're a commuter and you ding a certain number of times in a month, your next bill, you just get a 50% reduction. And so we have people in South Florida and some other parts of the state, they'll pay $100, $150, $200 a month in tolls depending on where they have to go for work. So this is going to save people hundreds of dollars, and in some cases it'll save them over $1,000. So when you're dealing with Biden inflation, when you're dealing with all these problems, we've just basically said, how can we provide relief to everyday Floridians? And it's been very popular, and people appreciate it.
Well, I looked at it and I said, Mike DeWine, take note. This should happen on the Ohio Turnpike, because I used to have to go from the first exit to the third exit like every day. Second, in the December, you began to fix the property insurance crisis. How long will that take to remedy the market imbalance like California had with earthquake insurance? It took a lot of years for it to get worked out. What about the start you made in December?
Well, as you know, this has been a market that's been in turmoil really for 20 plus years. And I think the root cause of it has been Florida had incentivized a lot of lawsuits in these matters, and you'd get attorney's fees if you were the plaintiff in one, but you didn't have to pay if you were the plaintiff in loss. And so that ended up in a situation where Florida had 8% of property claims, insurance claims nationally, but they accounted for 78% of the litigation costs. And so that created a lot of turmoil. So that was fixed. There were some other reforms to get the market more reflective of what you see in other states, because there's other states that have very good markets. Yes, we have more perils, and people understand that, but we've had a lot of turmoil. So those reforms have been very well received. I think what's going to happen is you're going to get through this year, hopefully, knock on wood, we have uneventful hurricane season, and then I think you'll start to see more private capital deployed. But ultimately, Hugh, the way to stabilize rates is to empower consumers to have choices where people have to compete for their business. And that has not been the case in Florida, because there's been a lot of people that have not wanted to deploy capital here because it's been such a tumultuous market in the legal sense.
Now, Governor, the story behind the story there is that you beat the plaintiff's bar. That's very hard, because even a lot of Republicans across the country are in the thrall of the plaintiff's bar. They got so much money. How did you roll them?
Well, so I think the December property insurance reform, it just had reached a crescendo. We had done a special session in May of last year to knock out some reforms, which were helpful, but they didn't get at the litigation piece. Once the election was over, we had new leadership come in the House and Senate, and they understood we've got to get this done. But it gets even better because what we did in the regular session, we did full-scale tort reform across the board for everything in Florida's legal system. And I think when people look at Florida over the years, we've had low taxes, reasonable regulations, a good environment. However, we were known as a judicial hellhole. Now, I fixed that on the judicial side when I first became governor because I replaced 3 liberal Supreme Court justices with 3 conservatives. So the activism ended, and that was very good for our economy. Now, we still had a lot of these attorney's fees provisions, incentivizing lawsuits. So we got rid of all of that, and I think now we're going to be in a situation where we did basically what Texas did 15 or 20 years ago, and I think Florida's economy's done well, but I think we're going to be on the upswing in terms of business formation and more capital being invested here. So it was a really, really positive reform. And as you're right, they're very powerful, the trial bar, and in Florida they've been very smart because they haven't just supported Democrats. Like, yes, they'd rather have a Democrat than a Republican, but they get involved in Republican primaries and Republican districts, and they've been able to build support. But I think the fact that we had super majorities this year and people had been wanting to see some action for a long time, we got over the hump. And so it's a big deal.
Note to the audience, I did a couple of hours last night getting ready for this, and the tort reform didn't come up in the news. I didn't know you did tort reform. I've got like 10 different stories here, but tort reform doesn't interest anyone except the people it cripples when they're in a bad lawsuit. And so well done. Let's go to the voucher expansion, school choice. Florida began the school choice movement under Governor Bush, and now you've reached the tipping point. You went all the way. Tell people what you did.
So when I first became governor, we expanded our tax credit scholarship and created family empowerment scholarships. And so that was basically public money going to parents directly, not just the corporate tax credit. So we've built on that every year. It's been very successful. But then what we said this year is, you know what? The money should follow the student. And so it doesn't matter where you come from, because we've been focusing on low-income families, as you should. I mean, the single moms who are able to get into a better school for their kid is a big deal. But at the same time, we understood that this is something that should empower parents across the board. And we've got a lot of middle-income families, Hugh, in places like Miami and these places where the cost of living is higher. You could make $100,000. You may not be able to afford private school. So now it's universal, and it's what we call an education savings account. So instead of a scholarship, you're going to have an account, and then you direct where the money goes. So, yes, a lot of that money will go to tuition if they choose to go to a private school, but it could also go to tutoring. It could also go to other type of education services depending on the needs of the child. So this is the biggest expansion of school choice in the history of Florida and really in the history of the United States. And I think the verdict on this is in. We were just ranked yesterday, it came out in U.S. News and World Report, #1 for K-12 education. When you saw the 2022 NAEP results, the nation's report card, we were 3rd and 4th, respectively, in 4th grade reading and 4th grade math. So what that is telling me, and what should tell other people, is the fact that parents are empowered to make decisions, not just their local school. They can go to a charter school. They can go to a private school. That has actually caused all the schools to have to compete for students, and our school districts are much improved today prior to when we had school choice.
It also tells me that what Larry Arnn said last hour, that you handled COVID better than any other governor, is true, that you reopened the schools that had to close as much more quickly, and therefore you did not lose the ground the rest of the country did. Do you think that's part of it?
I think so. I mean, I think if you remember that time, this is like the summer of 2020. I said kids are going to be in school. Every single school in Florida needs to be open, and we have to give students the opportunity. And we understood that the risk to the kids was very low. That's not what the media was saying. They were trying to scare parents and thinking all their kids were going to die if they went to school, which was just ridiculous. And so when we did that, it was the right thing. I think it was obvious on the data, but it was definitely something that we got a lot of blowback from. I mean, the left was after us. The teachers union in Florida sued me to try to close the schools. They didn't want to have a school year. The media attacked us, and even some Republicans were saying that it was not the right right decision. Now, in hindsight, everybody acknowledges that having these prolonged school closures were a huge, huge mistake. And in pandemic preparedness, there was always the idea that if you had something like, a flu pandemic, you may have school closures for 2-3 weeks, but no one had ever said you would just indefinitely keep kids out of school for a year and a half, which is what you saw in some parts of the country. I don't think they'll ever fully recover from the damage that they did. And I think in Florida, what we said is, we're going to make sure that we're standing up for our kids. We're going to make sure that they have opportunities. And so being in school in person, sports, all that, we got that going. And I think we were the only big state in the country that had 100% school districts open, from the summer of 2020 on. And we're proud of that.
Well, I've been talking with Corey DeAngelis through this whole thing, and there's the Arizona model, the Iowa model, now the Florida model. I think I like your model better because it allows every parent. Maybe they want to, parents are different. They want different things. Maybe they go to the public school. Maybe they go to the Catholic school like I did. It's freedom. I love that. Now, speaking of teachers' unions, another bill that every red state should have done, I think you did it first, eliminate automatic deduction union dues from especially teachers' unions. A lot of teachers don't want to be in those unions. They can't get out without a lot of pressure. You now take the pressure off of them, and bravo.
Yeah, so what the unions will do is they'll put an authorization form in front of the teacher, so you got to sign this to authorize the deductions. They don't say how much money it's going to be or anything. So they sign it, and then you get multiple deductions just as a matter of course, withholding and stuff on your paycheck. So it's not something that's as noticeable. So our view is if someone wants to join a teachers union, we should not be involved from the government perspective of doing any of these automatic deductions. They can write the check and they can hand it. I think fewer and fewer teachers are going to want to do that. And in Florida, actually, the majority of members of the teachers unions aren't even teachers. It's people, other types of employees in the school system. But I've done more to increase teacher salaries than any governor in Florida history. But here's what happened. We would earmark money only for teacher salaries. It can't be used for anything else, but it still requires the negotiation with the school district and the union. And some unions in some of these blue counties were holding back the teacher salary increases and using that as leverage to get other things that they wanted. I'm like, wait a minute, these are the people you're supposed to be representing. You got a pile of cash that we've provided, get the money in their pockets. And so what we're doing this year, we're protecting against the automatic deductions, but we're also doing $1 billion teacher, we call it a categorical. It's got to go to increase teacher salaries. So that's the biggest increase in the history of Florida, and I think we're doing it right. And we're also, by the way, pairing that with what we're calling teacher empowerment. Some of these teachers are under the gun if they ensure discipline in the classroom, and that's wrong. They have a right as a teacher to have a orderly classroom, and if a student is disruptive, the other students have a right to have that student disciplined or removed. Now, the way modern schools work, it's almost like the teacher's the bad guy just by ensuring discipline. So we're standing up for the teachers in Florida. We think it's important, but we absolutely think their paychecks need to be protected, and they should not have these automatic union due deductions.
There can be a renaissance in public schools if teacher union get out of the way and if, in fact, teachers are allowed to teach and discipline is restored. Well done. Now, the immigration bill approved by the Florida legislature. It's complex. What is the key part of it, do you think?
I think the number one thing is what we're saying is, look, we don't control immigration law. It's federal, but we can eliminate incentives to come illegally. So we are doing mandatory E-Verify so that if you're hiring people in the state of Florida, you got to run them through the system and ensure that they're here legally. And if they're not here legally, we want a legal workforce in Florida. That's always been the law, that you have to have a legal workforce, but we didn't necessarily have the mechanism to be able to do that. We also have penalties for things like human smuggling, because what we've done is with the border crisis, we sent people to the border to help Governor Abbott. We've done a lot of stuff, but we've sent up basically a strike force in the Florida Panhandle for people coming in on I-10 into the state of Florida. And what you find is, you find people that are being smuggled in by some of these folks. And so we believe that you need to have accountability there. So that's going to really empower law enforcement to ensure that that's not happening in the state of Florida. And then we do other things in there. I mean, for example, years ago they said that illegal aliens are able to be members of the Florida bar. And our view on that is, wait a minute, how are you an officer of the court when you're not even here legally yourself? And so we're saying that is not appropriate going forward. So basically just saying, we want to do it. We want things to be legal. We want to disincentivize illegal migration into the state of Florida. And I think that we're hitting the sweet spot.
Common sense conservatism again. I want to go to guns. I follow Second Amendment jurisprudence pretty closely from Heller to McDonald to Bruin. You got ahead of it because, as anyone who knows the First Amendment knows, permits are almost always suspect coming out of the box. If you were permitting something, you're allowing the state to abuse. You did away with the permit requirement for concealed carry. How controversial? Why did you do it?
Well, this idea of you have a right to keep and bear arms, that's a constitutionally protected right. What we saw was these permits were being run through the Department of Agriculture in Florida. And up until January, my first 4 years as governor, that office was held by a liberal Democrat. And what she would do is she would slow walk permits. She would even just deny permits for frivolous reasons. And so that is basically subcontracting out your Second Amendment right to the whim of a bureaucrat. And that's not something that's appropriate. And so our view is you have the right to both keep and bear arms. And so in Florida, we actually joined 25 other states. And so the majority of the states in this country are what we call constitutional carry states. And you have a right to do that. Now, from a law enforcement perspective or a crime perspective, how many criminals are deterred from using a firearm because they didn't get a permit to conceal carry the gun? I would hazard to guess it's probably zero, and I can tell you in those 25 other states, you've not seen any increase in crime as a result of doing permitless carry. And so we're doing what we think is constitutionally appropriate, but also we have a record of how this works in practice. And look, the one thing a criminal doesn't like is not knowing who may give them some pushback if they're trying to commit a crime. And so when they know that in the state of Florida, we're a concealed carry state, you don't have to have a permit to do it, they are going to think twice in many instances before they engage and try to harm other Floridians.
Now, part of the red state 100 days are a two-part approach to the death penalty. This is crime, and I applaud both of these heartily. First, I had no idea that Florida required a unanimous verdict for the death penalty and that the killer at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High walked because they only had 9 out of 12. You've changed that now. You can get a death penalty verdict on 8 out of 12. Plus, you put child rapists under 12, where the victim is under 12, back on the death penalty capital crimes list. That's a direct challenge to Supreme Court jurisprudence. I believe it's a wise challenge because this court will have changed, and I think they will uphold that. Is that the judgment you made?
Yeah, I mean, we think it was a 5-4 decision. Kennedy, Louisiana, you're familiar with it. It was not rooted in any of the text history or structure of the Constitution. And look, heinous crimes, not every heinous crime gets the death penalty, but clearly if you have a serial rapist for these very young kids, that should be on the table as the only appropriate punishment for the community to express its proper revulsion of those crimes. And so our hope is that we could preempt or deter these crimes from happening, but we know that they do. And so our hope is we tee this up, the court eventually accepts it, and then they're able to, I think, reevaluate the jurisprudence because we now have a majority on the court who don't want the jurisprudence to just be floating in the ether, susceptible to the whims of the court. They really want it grounded in text history and structure. Clearly, these were crimes that would have been appropriate for the capital punishment at the time of the founding when the Eighth Amendment was ratified. And so we think that's right. Now, on the 8 to 12, people know, I mean, you need a unanimous verdict for guilt. And so some people say, well, someone could get death penalty if they're not guilty. No, it's a unanimous verdict for guilt. That's how it should be. But they've already been found guilty of a very heinous crime. And so now the question is, can you have just 1 or 2 jurors basically veto capital punishment because you're supposed to be willing to give capital punishment if you get on. Right. Our view on the Parkland case was that some of those jurors really just objected to the idea of capital punishment. Well, then that's not fair. And we had never required unanimous until our liberal Supreme Court back in the day. They read that in to this Florida Constitution, and it wasn't there. Our current conservative court reversed that, so then that gave us the ability to change the statute, which the legislature had changed to comply with the original court decision. So what we're doing is really just restoring what it had always been in the state of Florida. And in the Parkland case, it was a punch in the gut, Hugh, because this was a guy, that took these lives. They forever wounded this community. So many of the families are heartbroken over this, and all we asked for was just justice. And this happened in 2018, and it took all these years just to even get to this point, and then to have him not given the ultimate punishment was something that was very, very hard for a lot of people to take. So we decided to do something about it.
That, again, not well publicized, very important. The elections bill in Florida, I don't know Florida election law. It's awfully complex. What's the key part of a 100-page bill, Governor?
Well, look, we have strong election integrity in Florida. I mean, we've done things like ban Zuckerbucks. We've banned ballot harvesting in Florida. We've streamlined absentee voting. We do not allow mass mailing of voting. You, as a Floridian, have a right to request an absentee ballot, but you have to show ID and prove who you are, and then obviously you got to have a signature verification on the back end. They also did things like clean up what some of these third-party groups are doing, which causes problems with voter registration and some other type of fraudulent conduct. We also fixed our statewide election crimes office, which is bringing prosecutions for voter fraud. Some courts had found jurisdictional defects, so they fixed that. So I would say if you look at 2020 and 2022, I think Florida did the best in the country in terms of transparency and efficiency, and I think we're building off of success. So Floridians can be confident their vote counts, their vote matters, and these elections are going to be done efficiently and transparently. And you know what? We produce results on the night of the election, even though we have 9 to 12 million people voting, depending on whether it's a midterm or a presidential year. How much better is that than some of these other states that take a week, 2 or 3 weeks just to count the ballots?
Oh, California. Don't get me started. Okay, Governor, I'm up against your heart out, but I do want to tell people, I know that you signed a new pro-life bill in Florida, and I think the legislature passed the bill overturning the DA that Disney negotiated, the development agreement that Disney negotiated with itself. You pick them. You've got the time clock. Tell me what you want to talk about in which order and what you want to say about them, because the national news media distorts both of those stories very, very badly, but let's hear your side.
Well, our protections for life are protections for unborn child when there's a fetal heartbeat, and then there's exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother, and that was something that we were very proud to do. It's going to save a lot of lives in Florida, and it was the right thing to do. On the Disney thing, as you said, they negotiated with themselves to try to get out from what the Florida legislature had determined, that they should not be able to govern themselves and they should live under the same laws as Universal and SeaWorld. So it was really a middle finger to the people of Florida that they don't think that they should have to follow the same laws, and they don't even care what the elections are or what the legislature says. So Florida law, though, does allow these development agreements to be revocable because you have some special district or some local government doing that. If it's against public policy or if it conflicts with state policy, of course the state can step in and do that. There's also the state board is doing a declaratory judgment action in state court. We believe the contract that Disney tried to do has so many different flaws. The media has been absolutely horrific on reporting this. They have no clue what's going on with Florida law, and a lot of that is motivated reasoning. National corporate press, they want me to do bad, and so it's like wishful thinking to think that Disney somehow is in the right here. So we'll deal with that and win that. But here's the thing with the Disney thing. The win was getting the parents' rights legislation in. The win has been pursuing all these other good bills where they no longer have influence over the process. So we won on the substance that affects the people of Florida. That is the most important thing. Yes, they shouldn't govern themselves. Yes, we're going to win that fight too. But to me, that's secondary to how are we governing the state of Florida? And what we've basically been able to do is this Burbank, California-based company that has much different values than Florida, they are not influential in that process anymore, and that is a good thing.
Now, Governor, I want to close by saying most of the media doesn't understand this. I did land use law for 30 years. I did development agreements for 30 years. Disney was a client of my firm, though not in land use. There's no conflict here. I never saw an entity negotiate with itself. It's simply not a contract. There's no peppercorn, as we say in the law. And you tried to point that out. I don't think the media understands that they threw a searchlight on themselves. You didn't go seeking out trouble with Disney, but if you turn the searchlight on your special deal, people are going to notice, and they're going to notice you're negotiating with yourself.
Exactly. And what are you supposed to do after the legislature acted, after this was a main issue in our election, and I did better in Central Florida than a Republican's done in a long time, to then turn around and allow this one company to basically contract around what the legislature had already determined? I mean, we would be it would be a joke if we didn't pursue a remedy there. But they were the ones that tried to do it by doing the underhand arrangement. And this was negotiated on behalf of the old district by Disney's attorney. I mean, there was no separation at all. It is not a valid contract. There was no consideration, and that'll be very apparent as the state court action goes, in addition to what the legislature did. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think most people understand, like, hey, allowing one corporation to have its own government with no accountability and exempting from laws that every other company and individual in Florida has to follow, that is not a good way to do business. And clearly, that is not consistent with free market competition. I don't require Adam Smith writing in The Wealth of Nations that the way to increase wealth creation is to grant one corporation special governing rights and privileges. That's really antithetical to how a market economy is supposed to work.
Last question, Governor. Did you set out to do a red state 100 days, or is that just what happened?
We said we were going to be bold. Now, obviously, because we won big and we swept in super majorities, we've had a lot of opportunities to do great things. And so I think we got to go through the budget. We got to do all this. But, a couple weeks from now, after we go through all the bills, we will have produced, I think, the boldest, most significant body of work that has ever been done in the history of our state, and we would put it up with any state in the country in the modern history of the United States. And so we're very proud of that. But winning, we focus on politics and elections. Winning's important, of course, and you can pat yourself on the back if you win a big election, but that just gives you an opportunity to make a difference. And so we've seized that opportunity, and man, we've gotten every bit of meat off that bone, and we didn't let any opportunity go to waste.
Governor, thank you for the extra time. I know I blew past the deadline. Keep coming back, and I appreciate your patience this morning.
Okay, thanks, Hugh. Take care.
Go Browns. Go Baker. Bye-bye.